Live before a studio audience is public speaking. Welcome. How are you guys? I hope everything's good. Having a good first week of classes, I hope. We're ready. We're ready for a nice lecture today. Today we're going to talk about how we got to public speaking. What is public speaking? What are we supposed to be doing with it? And how did we get here? What's the history, and what exactly are we looking at when we're talking about public speaking? Because it's a weird thing. Like, most universities across the United States require it, with the exception of the Ivy Leagues. The Ivy League colleges don't really require it. But there's some historical reasons for that, because the Ivy Leagues are kind of immune to a lot of different historical effects. But other colleges that have missions of like trying to, like we could say the Ivy League colleges are attempting to preserve a certain nature of class and power and a power structure, power relationship. That's why people go there, is to buy into a power relationship that exists already. Other colleges, your state universities, land-grant colleges, other kinds of institutions of higher education, of which St. John's is one, the Catholic tradition of the mission of the Catholic University, a Jesuit mission, but not all Catholic schools are Jesuit, as we know, of trying to make more educated people and offer education to all kinds of people as an act of charity and an act of goodwill to benefit them. They are interested in increasing the amount of people who have this kind of access to power, or maybe even changing it. Maybe even changing the way things are arranged was the traditional way of doing it. So one of the things is that you might not have had as much experience in being able to speak confidently to different audiences as someone who comes from wealth and power and influence. And that's kind of where public speaking came from. So looking at this on the big board, as we go to the big board here somewhere, how do we get this term public speaking? Where does it come from? How did we arrive at this term? Well, before there's public speaking, we have courses in and this is in the United States, right? Rhetoric, writing, and speech. Let me change the size of this thing. Well, it's not working for me. Okay, we'll go over here, and then we'll do it. There we go. So rhetoric and writing and speech are courses that have existed a very long time in the United States, even from the colonial period. And in the colonial period, you have people who are thinking about different kinds of relationships here. Rhetoric, writing, and speech are a couple of different things. One is the tradition of writing and rhetoric, which is composition. So that's where you get composition from, is that everyone who's educated should be able to write. And in the United States, literacy was at an all-time high for most of the countries founding the colonial period, all of that. There's another connection here, which is the connection of, I don't want any of those. The connection of debating, which is something that has a strange relationship in universities and in education in the United States where, okay, come on, let's go. Okay, why can't I move this? Come on now. Maybe I should just double click it and I can move it around. Yeah, this thing is being annoying. Anyway, the point is that why can't I move it? Anyway, I guess it's just gonna have to live there because I can't move it. Anyway, these things all sort of come together because we move from, in this period of American history, we move from more of a focus on the republic and on teaching people how to be democratic citizens, and more in teaching people how to be corporate citizens. So when we look at why we've moved to, is this what I think it is? Is this a laser pointer? Let's use a highlighter. I want to do a highlighter. So when we think about public speaking, we move into public speaking as a modern conception of what we're teaching. we're thinking about it in terms of corporation and work and being a corporate citizen rather than the previous engagement in public speaking, which was like how to be a citizen. And of course, you can use this stuff in work as well. So if you look at the public speaking textbooks and how they've changed over time, what you find is that earlier public speaking textbooks have much more of a focus on things like how to speak to your neighbors, how to speak to other people at like a town meeting or something like that. Now, I would submit that most public speaking is taught like this. I don't teach it like this, but most of it's taught as like, here's how to get the upper hand in a corporate environment or have job skills. It can be a job skill, but that's really limiting what rhetoric can be. Writing and speech, composition, and debating, which is great practice in coming up with ways to effectively say things you believe to an audience that might not be immediately receptive to what you want them to think, is great, great, great practice, but it's practice that goes well beyond the workplace. It's practice for everyday life. It's practice for talking politics with people. It's all very, very, very important stuff to democracy. But we've all gotten away from that. Whose fault is that? Well, it's the fault of the rhetoric professors and the teachers of speech for saying, well, I need to make sure, how can my students get a job if they can't outline? And all of this kind of stuff, which, yeah, it's laughable. It's laughable. That's not the point. That's a side effect of the drug of rhetoric. And we'll get to that in a few minutes, the drug of rhetoric. So all this comes from the idea that a lot of people will say this, that the United States was the great experiment. I forget who said this quote. If you know who said this quote, leave it in the comments. I'll give you some bonus points in the class. Great experiment in democracy and mass literacy. And that's the way the American experiment is talked about sometimes. People will use this quote from time to time. But as a part of that, the idea became, well, if this is what we're going to do, then there needs to be some formal education in that. If you look at the history of the United States, you look back to the colonial period and the post-colonial period, there's so many newspapers, and there's so much reading. I think we're kind of getting back to that with the amount of online news that you can read on your phone. It's kind of similar to that if you're using your phone for that. I think TikTok is a different animal. If you're getting your news from TikTok or microblogging, that's a very different animal and a very different kind of rhetorical arrangement, and maybe not one that's great for democracy. But also, we're not looking at how to phrase things we believe or treating all beliefs as equal. What we're mostly doing here is saying, here's the right way, here are the right things to think about, and here are the right thing, the right kind of politics. And that informs this kind of public speaking, where it's like, you have to have scholarly sources. No, you don't. To make an effective speech, you don't have to have scholarly sources. You don't even have to have research sources at all. You have to have sources that the audience believes are good. That's a huge, huge difference between this right here and this. So I'd like to be more here, but we can go back even further in this and say, well, how did we get to this? Well, one of the traditions that we're coming to out of from this is this tradition of what we called elocution. Elocution. Did I spell it wrong? Oh, yeah. I like to put a Q in it, but the computer does not like it. We must follow our computer overlords, right? We must. And elocution, the elocutionary movement, is happening kind of at the same time as this. But this is sort of the movement from the 19th to the 20th century. We had this. In the 19th and 18th century, we had elocution, which is really teaching people the speech should sound pretty. So it didn't really matter what you were saying to the elocutionists. The content was really quite secondary. But elocution was the movement of making speech sound pretty. And you can look at elocutionary books and text, elocutionary movement stuff. All the elocutionists believe that it's about pronouncing things correctly, having the right kind of accent. Lots of things that can easily turn into essentialist or racist or sexist kind of teaching, that you have to enunciate and pronounce things correctly. Pronounce things correctly according to who? In rhetoric, the audience determines all of these things. The elocutionary movement was a direct result. Let's do it kind of like down like this, because this is like kind of to the side. It's good trivia, but it's kind of to the side of everything that we're talking about here. The side effect of a person in rhetoric is very important, named Peter Ramus. And Peter Ramus was working and living in France. He was a professor, and he's in the 17th century. So let's put a title here. We'll say this is 17th century. And then as we go forward here, like we're going to put, let's say that this is like the 19th and 20th century, we'll say over here. And then this would be the 18th, 19th century, 17, 18, 19th century here. And so you can see kind of how we're getting to public speaking as we're kind of moving along a line that is kind of going back and forth, because now it's like sound pretty. I would say a lot of contemporary public speaking is like, well, you have to learn how to speak correctly in an office or in a corporate environment. Most public speaking is aimed at a corporate environment. It's not really aimed at getting together with 20 people in your neighborhood and saying, what can we do about this? But that also might be governed by a corporate environment. The thing about rhetoric is you have to really look to the audience to determine what might be okay to say, or what they might think is true, or how they want the truth displayed. But Peter Ramus wrote a book about rhetoric, and he said, best kind of rhetoric is to have none at all. It's a very modern kind of sensibility, isn't it? I think most people would say, yeah, wouldn't that be nice to have a rhetoric that we just didn't have to worry about how things looked or perceived? We could just rely on truth. And I feel like we've moved back to this Peter Ramus idea that it would be better just to have truth. It would be better just to have truth and facts and things like that. So some of the teaching that's coming out of public speaking is that is really bad kind of stuff, like facts first. That we're looking to say things that are true. And all this kind of stuff, right? So public speaking can't be in contradiction or in contrary to things that are accepted as this. In rhetoric, which is what we should be teaching instead of this public speaking thing, these two things are arguments, that the facts should come first, and that we're looking at the truth. What if you're giving a speech and you're like, look, this is the way things are, but let's imagine a possible alternative arrangement of things. Now, you're not speaking about truth or facts there. You're using imagination and desire as the root of your speech. You can put the facts down about how many people are injured by firearms every year. But if that worked so well, why are we moved so much by stories of people who've lost a young child in a school shooting, or someone whose uncle died in a hunting accident, or a father who kills their 15-year-old daughter sneaking back in the house because she snuck out because she wasn't supposed to be out? Like, the handgun accidents at home stories are not factual. They're narratives. They're things that happened, but it's not like data the way we think about it. So it's really kind of a impoverished way to speak. What we want to do is think about, how can we practice this for our great experiment, democracy and mass literacy? And getting away from this kind of 17th century idea that we don't really need rhetoric. Rhetoric is just a side hustle to philosophy. And that's kind of the way it's been. But before that, we go back to the medieval times, and we find that rhetoric really structured the university. The study of how to put things together, make them sound good, make them sound persuasive and interesting to people. This is for a very, very, very long time. And what would you study in the university? Things that we're going to be studying in this class in public speaking. Argument. How do I make a claim that sticks? How do I make something make sense to my audience? What else are we going to be looking at? Something that might surprise you. Speech is a creative act. You're not just going and researching facts and statistics. Speaking is a creative act. We're creating arguments. We're creating things. Another thing that we're very, very concerned with in this class that maybe in other classes aren't as concerned with is audience. What does the audience care about? Who is the audience? Why? We are always addressing what we're saying to the audience. This is probably one of the most important things is who's this? Who are we talking to? Who's this audience? And the more that we think about that, the more we might change our claims to be in contradiction to facts first. The facts might not help us reach the audience in this case. How can we reach the audience? We can tell a story about one of their heroes. They're more willing to listen to us. It's all about choices. A lot of people don't believe that public speaking or creating a speech is about choices. It's about being in conformity to high-level research. Nothing could be further from the truth. We also need to know the attitude of our audience and figure out their attitude. What's their emotional state? What are they going through? What are they thinking about? What are they feeling about? What are they feeling about? It's kind of like ridiculous.
Oh.
What are they feeling? What are they thinking about? What's on their mind? And I think these kind of things are, so this would be like a very long time. All the way back, this would be like prior to, what did we say over here? We said 17th century. I think this would be like the medieval university. Well, even the 18th century. And one of the big figures here, one of the big historical figures who's kind of bridging this gap right here, is an Italian thinker named Vico. Why is this thing giving me trouble? Vico. Okay. So Vico was a professor of law and a professor of rhetoric. And he said that rhetoric was the thing that makes science possible, that makes thinking possible. And then he taught law and he taught rhetoric. And it was a way of sorting and arranging and creating insight into the stories that people think motivate the world. Giambattista Vico, he wrote a huge book on rhetoric, calling Rhetoric the New Science. And as we're moving into, well, actually, I should put him on the other side of Ramus here. Because he stands out as a pretty big figure, I'd say. So he's kind of like trying to bring it back from Ramus and Ramus's friends who were saying, we don't really need to make it look pretty if it's factual. If we have evidence, if we have scientific evidence on our side, it doesn't matter how it looks. But then you look around today with vaccine deniers, science deniers, people who deny government agencies and government facts like election results, things like that. We're in a position where people are like, I don't need to explain myself because these are the facts. I don't need to explain it because these are the facts. These are like people who try to change your mind by saying, well, it's something you can't change. It's just culture. It's just the economy. It's something you can't change. That's not a rhetorical statement. That's a statement where it's like we're imprisoned by the factual. We can't do a lot about it. One of the things that I want you to think about is how can we change our orientation to that? How can we change our orientation to being facts first or facts only? And get back to a thing where we're thinking about what constitutes, how do people change their minds? Who are the people who change their minds? How do I craft something for them? And what's necessary to kind of point things out to them that would make sense? We're going to look at this by jumping back a lot further, and we're going to be looking at the Roman Republic as it transitions to empire through some of the work of someone who lived at that time, Cicero. So this was a long time ago, as you can probably guess. Much before the 13th century. I wonder some of the things that we're going to be looking at here. Well, some of the things we're talking about is organization. How do I put a speech together? What are the steps in putting a speech together? And I have a handout on that. What point should come first? What point should come second, etc. Another great thing we'll talk about is stasis theory. I should probably make a new video on that. It might be something that would be good. Stasis theory is how do I choose what I'm going to argue about? How do I choose that? And then the last one, very important, is delivery, which they also called being eloquent. But they have a very different understanding of eloquence than Peter Ramus. Peter Ramus writes his attack on rhetoric thinking about these ancient Roman rhetoricians. We're going to look at two. One is kind of close Republic Empire, and then we might look at Quintilian, but Cicero is the person we're going to spend a lot of time with. He's a big name in this class. Big name, big money, no whammies. And he's kind of a Republic Empire guy. He lives through the beginning of the empire into the Republic. And then another guy who's very much an empire guy, who's much later than him, is Quintilian. And Quintilian, oh, did I spell his name wrong too? I did. I always put two L's. It's okay. Quintilian, we won't look at that much. I might have some stuff, but Quintilian was trying to recover the ways of speaking that were happening kind of in the Republic for the later empire. But Cicero was working and living, and he was a government official. He was a senator. He served as consul, which is like being president now, I guess, in the Republic. And he was thought of in his own time as a very, very good orator and a good speaker. And he has some ideas on that. So we'll do some lectures on that too. But they have a systematic way of doing it. They have a system and they have rules because they're basing everything on laws. There's a lot of things that are similar to the Roman Republic and Empire. They're similar to the United States Republic as we transition to a more authoritarian relationship with our government, what we think is appropriate, which is what's happening right now, I would say, from the rhetorical standpoint, is that we're becoming less and less democratic, more and more authoritarian. The changes in the way we speak about the role of the government and people are based on these big things that we would call commonplaces, or places where we invent argument. Commonplaces are things where you can invent an argument where you don't really have to explain it too much to people. I'm never going to get used to this moving the thing around. So commonplaces are an important part of Roman Republic and Empire rhetoric. We should make this bigger, huh? Shh. Yeah, there we go. Quintilian, you're kind of over here. Cicero, you're kind of more over here. I think having it visually, it's kind of like having a whiteboard, chalkboard maybe.
Oh.
I don't know if you like it. But commonplaces are things you can reference that everybody would know what you're talking about that don't need a lot of explanation. So one for us in the United States, I would say, is the Constitution. We are always arguing and we're saying it's not constitutional, this is not constitutional, that's not constitutional, blah, 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 blah. And people are like, it's a constitutional right, da-da-da. And that doesn't mean anything for anybody who, from the far future, maybe the Constitution is lost. They might say, what are they talking about? It wouldn't mean anything automatically for them, and it doesn't mean anything automatically for anyone who doesn't live under the U.S. Constitution. Although many, many countries, democratic countries, republics, socialist republics, things like that, they mirror and model our law because they really admire the U.S. Constitution as a great feat of the legal imaginary, I would say, is a good way to think about it. But in Rome, what did they have? The 12 tables. It's kind of like their founding document. And so these would be commonplaces. So you're going to see Cicero mention the 12 tables quite a bit. And what he's doing is kind of like making a constitutional argument. This is the root of where we get our understanding of not only the actual law, but an understanding of what the law should be. Our imaginary relationship with the law. What do we think a good law should do? And as you think about that question, you start to generate things that are arguments that will go back to the Constitution as your evidence that then you could use to audiences to persuade to them that whatever you think should happen, should happen. So that's a very different sense of evidence that we would get from a modern conception of public speaking where it's like, no, a scientist needs to say it. It's just true that we have these rights. And that's the way people argue today. You see it all the time on TikTok, on Instagram, and also just stop watching TikTok. Just stop. But you see it all the time there. This helps you become a little bit more creative, but it's based on something, our imaginary. It could be based on the real Constitution, but more importantly than that is the stories we tell about the U.S. Constitution and the founding give us a sense of a vibe of what we think the law should be. Now, the Romans are getting a lot of this stuff from the Greeks. As you all know, you've taken a history class, right? Mostly from the Athenians, who had a democracy. They were democratic. They gave us the word democracy, right? But they have a democracy that's a little bit different than what we would like as a democracy today. What does democracy mean? It's a government by the people. Demos means people. So that's a very important thing for rhetoric, is notice that it's not based on something called a factocracy or a scientific informationocracy. It's a democracy. The focus of the government should be the people. What do the people want? The people's stories must be heard. And for the people to be effectively heard, they have to know something about audience, something about how to attract people, something about how to speak to people and get their attention. You have to know some of these things. And all this went into the much more structured government of the Roman Republic. Athenian democracy was open to any Athenian-born person who had property, who was a man. If you were Athenian woman, you couldn't own property, and you also couldn't vote just because you're a woman. You're born female. You can't do it. So it's really just to these people who have this kind of landed connection to the city of Athens. Even if you were a foreigner and you were a great contributor to the city and you did everything right and you lived there your whole life, you could never be a citizen who would vote. You could never be a citizen. Owning property might help your descendants, but it would take a long time to get there. The Athenians had a giant business of foreigners teaching people how to speak well, because speaking was everything. If you got accused of a crime, there's no police force. You defend yourself. Capital crimes, they have capital crimes. They have capital punishment. You can be executed for certain crimes in Athens. So people really want to learn how to speak well because they might have to defend themselves in front of a jury trial. You have 301 or 501 Athenian men who will judge whether you're guilty or innocent, and the punishment, comes from the law. What are the people to determine the law was? You have to pay a fine, got to go to prison, all of these things. So this started an industry of foreigners who came to Athens and taught people how to speak well, and they were called the Sophists. The Sophists did a great business in Athens. The Sophists were very good at what they did. And one of the most famous Sophists, there's a lot of them, but one that we might read about, talk about, I might do a couple of lectures on, is Gorgias. Gorgias was probably the most famous Sophist because he was a performer and entertainer as well as a teacher of speech. And one of the things he did was he would give speeches and make arguments about things that he didn't really believe in. And that entertained the Athenians to no end. They're like, wow, look at how persuasive he is. And then you see like, yeah, I don't actually believe that. I just did that for the lulz, or whatever we might say, or just to impress you. And I can teach you how to do that too. And one of the things he did very famously was he would say, I will stand up here after my performance and answer any question you put to me. And you'll feel like I know it. You'll feel like I know what I'm talking about. Was he being willfully deceptive? Well, some people thought so. But most people were like, wow, that's great to have that kind of authority over an audience and hold them in your hand. That would be great for a democracy where I have to defend myself in court. And also, if I want something done, I have to go and make the argument myself. I can't just tell my congressperson to do it. I got to go to the assembly. I have to make the argument myself about what should happen in the country. Imagine if we had that today. It would be like, well, I got to travel to D.C. because this week I have to make my argument in front of Congress about what should happen in Queens or what should happen in the Bronx. It's a wild thing. And that's the way it was. So people like Gorgias made a lot of money. They were very wealthy, and Gorgias was Italian. He wasn't even Athenian. He came in. These foreigners did this, and there was a very, very famous sophist named Aspasia, who was a woman. She was a Theban, and she came, and she was very, people were very jealous of her. They thought that she was kind of messed up because she was a woman, and she was very well educated, and also educated people in sophistry, which is the art of speaking. How do I convince other people that I'm right if I'm just can only use my words? I can't use force. And this is the heart of my teaching, I would say here, is the sophistic kind of attitude. This is me as your professor. I like this sophistic attitude. I think it's very important to be able to say, how can I make the meaning change for people in ways that will make them really consider my argument? And the sophists were not terribly interested in saying, well, I'm just going to present the facts and the research, and if you don't get it, you're a dummy. They went much further than that. They were like, let's look at how you already support this. Let's look at your values. Let's look at how I can take what you already believe and think and use it to show that you already agree with my idea. And people were like wowed by this, and he made a lot of money. Opposed to him are a group of people called the Socratics. This would be hero of philosophy, Socrates, and his student Plato. Now, the thing about Socrates is we don't know, how much he really believed about what he's saying, because his students wrote everything. He didn't write anything down. Socrates famously didn't wear shoes, and he didn't write anything. Well, he might have written things like annoy Athenians, like, his daily checklist. Annoy Athenians, check. Leave shoes at home, check. Stuff like that. But Socrates was a big, big, big fan of Athenian society, and he was a big celebrity in his own lifetime. His student Plato is how we know really anything about him. There are other people who have written about Socrates, like Aristophanes, the famous playwright, people like that. But he was kind of a celebrity because he never wore shoes. He ran around the mall all day, and he would just kind of like harass people and be like, do you really need to be buying that? And they'd be like, I need it. What does need really mean? Go away, Socrates. I'm busy. Right? And so Socrates and Plato would challenge the sophists. They did not like what they had to do, because they said what they're doing is they're presenting pure imagery. They're not presenting the truth at all. They're presenting what they want things to look like, and that's dangerous for the Republic. What we should, not for the Republic, but for the city. What they should be doing is focusing on what's true and spending a lot of time thinking and focusing on what is true, questioning each other and making sure that the truth always comes to the top. So their method over here is what was called dialectic, which is still practiced in philosophy today, which is a rigorous sort of form of question and answer that is done in formal philosophy. And the method that the sophists came up with, which Plato named it, rhetoric, which is, how do I use words to convince people that I'm right? And the question is, well, how do you know what's true? How do you know what's true here? And the sophists would say, well, what's true is different for different people. Depending on your perspective, your life experiences, depending on what's going on in your life, these things would be very different. There's not one real answer. And if you're going to go to people and say, well, this is true, you're going to need to take into account their experiences. And Socrates and Plato did not believe that. What they believed instead was that there's a universal human experience that is in your soul, or in the realm of what they call the ideal. And we can access that through rigorous questioning and being open to the fact that we don't really know anything. That was Socrates' famous quote, right? I know that I know nothing, but I'm happy to question until we reach a place where we're both satisfied by the questioning of what beauty is, what a lie is, what does it mean to govern effectively, all of these kinds of things. Rhetoric was useful for the sophists in terms of, like, you only have a limited amount of time in court to defend yourself. You only have a limited time in front of the assembly to say, look, we really do need to repair this part of our defenses because the Persians are coming, or whoever is coming to attack us. It's really important politically. And it was a student of Plato who, during Athens, long after, or at the end of Plato's life, a student of him who kind of buried the hatchet between the two and kind of gave rhetoric its modern place, which is rhetoric's necessary, but it has these lacking elements to it, and that would be Aristotle. And Aristotle wrote a whole book about this called The Rhetoric. Such a great title. When you write books so early in human history, you can just title them whatever they are. Like, I'm going to write a book about fish. It's called Fish. You don't really need to differentiate it if you're like one of the earliest people writing about it, right? So he was the one who kind of took and said, look, this has use, dialectic has use, rhetoric has use. But my feeling is, as somebody who studies this stuff, I think that dialectic is a modality of rhetoric, just like argumentation would be, just like public speaking would be, just like discussion would be, just like debate would be. And dialectic is understandable and accessible through rhetoric as well. It is a way of speaking that has rules to it that are agreed upon by the participants. And that's the way rhetoric works too. Like the way that we argue in Congress, the way your representative or the way senators argue in the Senate is based on rules of procedure they all agree to, which are nothing but words. there are these policies and procedures that can be voted on and changed. We could change those if we wanted to. The big fight between them two is a question that I'm going to pose to you here as we reach the end of this video, which is the big question that Socrates asked them is that Gorgias can't effectively answer. Well, because Plato is writing everything that Gorgias is saying. It's not a real exchange. It's not a transcript. Plato's writing it all. Is rhetoric an art? And this question is going to come up for us in our reading, because in Cicero's orator, he's going to make this an important question. Is rhetoric an art? It's going to come up again. What is an art? For the ancient Athenians, an art was something that benefits human beings, that has general principles but not rules, and it's something that could be taught to other people. Is rhetoric an art? Well, it doesn't really have general principles. I think Socrates' argument, and maybe I'll give a lecture on the Gorgias if you guys want to read it. Let me know. I can provide you a copy of it. It's very easy and free in the library. We can read it, and we can get to this question of what it is, because all of this speaks to what does it mean, and how do we make sure that when we're speaking to other people and trying to convince them of something, we're doing it right. So look at how teeny tiny public speaking is. Then we have all this big. That's interesting that it happened like that visually, isn't it? But that's how we got to public speaking as a class that you have to take. But if this was the medieval times or the Roman times, well, if you're a woman, sorry, you're not allowed to be educated. But if you're a man, what would happen is you would be studying rhetoric completely, and that's how you'd understand science and everything. So a lot of this stuff comes from groups of people who are highly essentialist, highly sexist, highly militaristic, highly toxic masculinity is the way I think about the Romans. And then over here, we kind of have like a real bias towards the facts and a real bias towards a particular kind of reason instead of saying, let's use the kind of reason that works extremely well with people. This is kind of where we've ended up. I don't think we should be here at all. I think we should be teaching kind of the older stuff, and that's why I organized the class the way it was. But there's big questions. Is rhetoric something that should be taught at the university at all? Are we teaching deception the way Socrates and Plato would see it? Are we teaching something that's a fake art? Or are we teaching a necessary tool for a highly, highly, highly bureaucratic, highly legalized state like the Roman Republic and Empire were, a very highly legally technical kind of place, which is, I would say, what the United States is? And can we get back to something where we're giving people practice in how to function as a citizen rather than how to function in a corporate environment, which is, I'm afraid, I think that's mostly what speech education does. So can we get back there? Well, this is kind of fast and loose. I'm kind of thinking about some other lectures I'll give about this, but let me know what you think. What did you think about this? What are your questions? Talk to me in Discord, send me an email, talk to me on Canvas. Always happy to hear your opinions about these kinds of things. This lecture was just an introduction to public speaking or history of public speaking. How did we get here? And I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.
So it is like a big game for me, and all that we can see, the light that we can believe. So you see, a love that's lost too deep. The dawn shines down on the sea. A ghost is all that